I never thought my life would turn out like this. My name's Rita, and this is my story. I was born to farmers, good people who taught me the value of hard work from the day I could walk. Our day started before dawn, tending to the animals and crops. Life was simple back then. I'd go to school, come home, and help around the farm. Weekends were for family time and catching up on chores. I didn't know any different, and I didn't want to. But things changed when I graduated high school. My parents, bless their hearts, wanted more for me than a life on the farm. "Rita, we've been talking," Dad said one evening as we sat around the dinner table. "Your mom and I think you should go to college." And just like that, my world expanded. I packed my bags and moved to the city, a place so different from everything I'd known that it might as well have been another planet. College was an experience. The classes were interesting enough, but it was the people that really opened my eyes. Kids from all walks of life, with dreams and ambitions I'd never even considered. And then there was Jack. I met him in my second year. He was charming, confident, and so different from the farm boys back home. Jack knew exactly what he wanted from life, or so I thought. "Life's too short to waste it working yourself to the bone," he'd say, lounging on the grass outside the library. "We should enjoy ourselves while we're young." I was smitten. Here was someone who saw life as an adventure, not just an endless series of chores. We started dating, and before I knew it, we were talking about marriage. When I told my parents, they were cautious. They wanted to meet Jack, to get to know the man who'd stolen their daughter's heart. "He seems nice enough," Dad said after Jack's first visit to the farm. "But there's something, I don't know." "Just be careful, Rita." I brushed off his concerns. What did my old-fashioned father know about modern love? Jack was perfect, and we were going to have a perfect life together. My parents, bless them, paid for our wedding and even bought us an apartment in the city. "We want you to have a good start," Mom said, her eyes misty. "Thanks, Mom, Dad," I said, hugging them tight. "I promise I'll make you proud." As Jack and I stood at the altar, exchanging vows and rings, I thought my life was set. I had a husband who loved me, a good job in the city, and a bright future ahead. The first couple of years of our marriage were, well, I thought they were good. Jack and I both had jobs in the city, and we settled into a routine. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming even then. "Rita, do we have to go to your parents' farm this weekend?" Jack would whine every time I suggested a visit. "It smells like manure, and your dad always wants me to help with something." I'd sigh and try to reason with him. "They're my family, Jack. And they've done so much for us." "Fine," he'd grumble. "But I'm not shoveling any cow crap." I brushed it off as city boy squeamishness. After all, I'd grown up with those smells and chores. But now I wonder if I should have seen it as a red flag. 2 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was over the moon, and my parents were ecstatic. "A grandchild," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Rita, we're so happy for you." Jack's reaction was less enthusiastic. "A kid? Already? I guess that's okay." I chalked it up to nerves. Surely he'd warm up to the idea of being a father. My parents, bless their hearts, continued to support us. They bought us a car, paid for vacations. I was grateful, but Jack seemed to take it all for granted. "Of course they're helping us," he'd say. "That's what parents do." When our son, Tommy, was born, I fell in love all over again. But Jack, well, he tried, I'll give him that. But fatherhood didn't come naturally to him. "Can't you keep that kid quiet?" he'd complain when Tommy cried at night. "Some of us have to work in the morning." I'd bite my tongue and remind myself that we were both adjusting to parenthood. Life went on. We visited the farm when we could, though Jack's reluctance grew with each trip. "Your dad asked me to help fix the tractor again," he'd grouse. "I'm not a mechanic, for Christ's sake." I'd watch my dad and Jack working together, oil-stained and sweaty. Dad would be patient, explaining each step, while Jack would grimace and fumble with the tools. Then, tragedy struck. Within a year, both my parents passed away. I was devastated. "They're gone, Jack," I sobbed into his shoulder. "I can't believe they're gone." He patted my back awkwardly. "It'll be okay. At least they left us the farm." His words jolted me. The farm. My family's legacy. And all Jack could think about was what we'd inherited? In the midst of my grief, Jack dropped a bombshell. "We should sell the farm," he said one night over dinner. "We could buy a big house in the city. Live like kings." I wanted to argue, to fight for my family's legacy. But I was tired, worn down by grief and the demands of motherhood. And wasn't a wife supposed to support her husband's decisions? "Okay," I said quietly. "If you think it's best." And just like that, with a few signatures on some papers, my family's history was sold off to the highest bidder. The money went into our joint account, and Jack was like a kid in a candy store. "We're set for life, Rita," he crowed. "No more slaving away at work. We can do whatever we want." I nodded and smiled, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. This was what Jack wanted, and I was his wife. I had to support him, right? Life after selling the farm was different. The money from the sale cushioned us nicely, I'll give Jack that. We didn't have to work as hard anymore. We both cut back to part-time hours, and for a while, it felt like we were living the dream. But as the years went by, I started noticing things. Jack, who'd never been a hard worker to begin with, seemed to lose all motivation. He'd quit jobs at the drop of a hat, always with some excuse. That boss was a jerk, he'd say, or they expected too much. "I'm not a slave, you know." I tried to reason with him. "Jack, we can't live off the farm money forever. We need to think about our future." He'd wave me off. "Relax, Rita. We're set for life. Why work ourselves to death?" Meanwhile, our son Tommy was growing up fast. He graduated high school, then college, and before I knew it, he was working and living on his own. I was proud of him, but I missed having him around. Then one day, I was flipping through the newspaper when a name caught my eye. It was an article about a successful concrete production plant, owned by none other than Jack's uncle, Robert. "Jack," I called out, "did you see this article about your Uncle Robert?" Jack's face darkened. "I don't want to hear about that old tyrant," he snapped. I knew the story, or at least Jack's version of it. How his parents had died when he was young, leaving him in the care of his uncle. How Robert had been overbearing and controlling, trying to force Jack into the family business. "He never listened to what I wanted," Jack had told me years ago. "It was always about what he thought was best. So I left. Started my own life." Looking at Jack now, lounging in his robe at 2 in the afternoon, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Maybe it's time to make peace?" I suggested gently. "It's been years, Jack. People change." Jack's reaction was explosive. "Make peace? With that control freak? No way in hell, Rita. Drop it." I let it go, but the incident left me unsettled. There was so much anger there, so much resentment. It made me wonder what else Jack was carrying around, what other parts of himself he was hiding. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I overheard Jack on the phone. His voice was curt, dismissive. "I am not interested in his life and it does not concern me," he said sharply before hanging up. My curiosity got the better of me. "Who was that, honey?" Jack's face was a mask of indifference. "Hospital. My uncle's sick. If he kicks the bucket, at least I'll finally get something out of him." I stared at him, shocked. "Jack, that's a terrible thing to say." "He raised you." "Yeah, and made my life hell," he snapped. "I'm not going to see him." End of story. As I watched Jack settle back into his armchair, remote in hand, something inside me snapped. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the person I thought I knew. Without a word to Jack, I went to our bedroom and called Tommy. "Hey, sweetie," I said when he picked up. "How would you feel about meeting your great uncle?" Tommy was surprised but agreed readily. An hour later, we were walking into the hospital, my heart pounding. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed voices. And there, in a bed surrounded by monitors, lay Jack's uncle Robert. He looked small and frail, nothing like the tyrannical figure Jack had described. When we introduced ourselves, his eyes filled with tears. "Rita, Tommy," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Oh, I've wanted to meet you for so long." Over the next hour, Robert told us his side of the story. How he'd taken Jack in after his parents died, raised him as his own. "I loved that boy," Robert said, his voice cracking. "I wanted him to have everything. To carry on the family business, to have a good life. But Jack, it seemed, had other ideas. He said he didn't want the responsibility," Robert continued. "Said he didn't want to work hard like I did, staying up nights worrying about the business." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as Robert's words painted a picture I recognized all too well. "Jack demanded I sell the business," Robert said, shaking his head. "Wanted me to set him up with a monthly allowance, an apartment, a car. Said I owed him a carefree life." I glanced at Tommy, seeing my own shock mirrored in his face. "I told him that's not how life works," Robert went on. "That money needs to be earned. I begged him to stay, to learn the business. But he just got angry. Said he'd find a rich wife and never have to work a day in his life." As I sat there in Uncle Robert's hospital room, memories from the past decade started flooding back. Like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place, I saw our life together in a new, harsh light. Jack had never held a job for long. He always chose part-time work, called in sick often, took countless days off. I'd attributed it to stress, to him being a free spirit. But now I saw the truth. "Life is for pleasure, Rita," he'd always say. "Why kill ourselves working?" I felt sick to my stomach as realization dawned. Jack hadn't married me for love. He'd married me for my family's money, for the comfortable life he thought I could provide. I was just a means to an end, the rich bride he'd promised his uncle he'd find. Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of this truth settled on me. Our whole life together, our marriage, our family, it was all built on a lie. Uncle Robert's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice weak. "I won't be able to leave anything to you or Tommy. I wanted to, but..." "It's okay," I said, squeezing his hand. "We don't need anything." "I had plans," Robert continued, growing agitated. "A new project. It would have changed everything. But I ran out of time." Suddenly, Robert's face contorted in pain. The machines around him started beeping urgently. "You need to leave," a nurse said, rushing in. "Now." A few days later, the call came. Uncle Robert had passed away. When I told Jack, his reaction made my blood run cold. "Finally," he exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "Took the old bastard long enough." I stared at him, disgusted. "Jack, he was your uncle. He raised you." He waved dismissively. Yeah. So, when's the funeral? Do we need to go to that?" In the end, Jack didn't attend. Tommy and I organized the funeral ourselves, a small, dignified affair that I hoped would have made Uncle Robert proud. While I was grieving for a man I'd barely known, my husband was at home, gleefully calculating his newfound wealth. "The factory's got to be worth at least 10 million, I heard him saying on the phone when I got home. "Can you believe it? I'm rich." I watched him strut around our house, boasting about his inheritance, and felt nothing but revulsion. This wasn't the man I thought I'd married. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. And then, things got worse. "You know, Rita," Jack said one evening, his eyes cold. "You're getting kind of old for me. I think I'm ready for an upgrade." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me?" He shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. "You heard me. I'm rich now. I can do better." Over the next few weeks, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd stay out late, coming home in the early hours reeking of booze and perfume. More than once, I spotted lipstick stains on his collar. Each time I confronted him, he'd brush me off. "Mind your own business," he'd sneer. "You should be grateful I come home at all." As I lay awake one night, listening to Jack stumble in at 3 a.m., I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this. I deserved better. But more importantly, I needed to know the truth about everything, about Jack, about the inheritance, about the life I thought we'd built together. One morning, after another night of Jack stumbling in at dawn, I'd had enough. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Jack sneered, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "None of your damn business, Rita. You should be grateful I come back at all." I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. "Grateful? Is that what you think our marriage is?" He ignored my question, instead fixing me with a calculating look. "Say, how much is left from your parents' inheritance? We must have some savings, right?" The sudden change of topic threw me off guard. "What, Jack, we've spent it all. The accounts are empty." His face twisted into an ugly mask of disgust. "Empty? You've got to be kidding me." He paced the room, muttering to himself. Then he turned back to me, his eyes cold. "Well, I guess that's it then. I'm done here, done with you." Before I could respond, the front door opened. Tommy walked in, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Jack's demeanor changed instantly. He plastered on a fake smile and approached our son. "Tommy, my boy. Just the person I wanted to see. I need you to sign something for me." He produced a document from his pocket, thrusting it at Tommy. "It's just a formality. You're renouncing any claim to Uncle Robert's estate. Since there's no will, it all comes to me anyway." Tommy glanced at me, confusion clear on his face. But after my nod, he took the paper and signed it without hesitation. Jack's grin was triumphant as he snatched back the document. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he turned back to me, all pretense gone. "I want a divorce," he announced, his voice cold and flat. "I never loved you, Rita. I just tolerated you for your parents' money. But now I'm rich. I don't need you anymore." The words hit me like physical blows. Even though I'd suspected, hearing it laid out so brutally. "I'm moving to Uncle Robert's house," Jack continued, already pulling out a suitcase. "Don't try to contact me. It's over." And just like that, he was gone. 30 years of marriage, packed away in a suitcase, and walked out the door. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. "Mom?" Tommy's voice was soft, concerned. "Mom, are you okay?" I turned to my son, my rock, and felt the dam break. Tears streamed down my face as Tommy wrapped his arms around me. "It's okay, Mom," he murmured, holding me tight. "We'll get through this. You're strong. You'll be okay." As I clung to my son, sobbing into his shoulder, a small part of me marveled at the man he'd become. Kind, compassionate, everything his father wasn't. And I realized something. "You're the best thing he ever did," I whispered to Tommy. "The only good thing to come out of this marriage." Tommy squeezed me tighter, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what happened next, I wasn't alone. I had my son, and together, we'd face whatever came our way. The weeks following Jack's departure were a blur of pain and disbelief. I tried to keep my head high, to focus on moving forward, but it wasn't easy. Especially when Jack seemed determined to flaunt his new life in my face. It started with the Facebook posts. Pictures of Uncle Robert's mansion, now Jack's new home, flooded his timeline. I tried to ignore it, to focus on healing, but then the photos changed. A young woman started appearing in them. Blonde, beautiful, barely older than our son. In one photo, Jack had his arm around her, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption made my stomach churn. "Meet my fiancé, Candy. Upgrade complete." The call started almost immediately. friends, acquaintances, even Tommy's old school teachers. All of them asking questions I didn't want to answer. Rita, dear, is everything okay? We saw Jack's posts, what's going on? Are you and Jack really? I couldn't take it anymore. The humiliation, the constant reminders of Jack's betrayal, it was too much. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Jack and asked to meet, after consulting with a lawyer. The day of the meeting arrived. I waited at our old favorite cafe, divorce papers in hand. Jack swaggered in, candy on his arm. She couldn't have been more than 25, her face caked with makeup, giggling at something Jack whispered in her ear. Well, Jack sneered, pulling out a chair for Candy. If it isn't the old ball and chain. Candy, honey, meet Rita. The starter wife. Candy gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil. But I kept my cool. I have the divorce papers here, I said, sliding them across the table. I'm not asking for much, just the house. You can keep everything else. To my surprise, he picked up the pen without argument. Fine, have your little house. I've got bigger and better things now. He scrawled his signature across the documents. He turned to Candy, his voice sickeningly sweet. Now I can finally be with someone I truly love. Someone worthy of me. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking slightly. As I walked out of the cafe, I heard Jack's mocking laughter behind me. But I didn't look back. I had what I came for. The next day, I filed for divorce. As I handed over the papers to the court clerk, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Life has a funny way of serving up justice when you least expect it. For me, it came in the form of a headline splashed across the local newspaper. Local business tycoon's empire crumbles, nephew left with massive debt. It turned out that Uncle Robert had taken out an enormous loan just before his death, hoping to expand the business. He'd mentioned something about a new project during our hospital visit, but Tommy and I hadn't understood the implications at the time. Now it all made sense. I watched from afar as Jack's new life crumbled around him. He sold the factory, the mansion, the cars, everything. And still, he was left owing nearly $1 million. The cherry on top? His young bride, Candy, packed her bags and left the moment she realized Jack wasn't the wealthy catch she'd thought he was. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with Jack. Then, one rainy evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Jack standing there, looking nothing like the smug, wealthy man who'd walked out on me months ago. He was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Rita, he said, his voice cracking. I've been such a fool. I see that now. Please, can we talk? Against my better judgment, I let him in. For the next hour, I listened as Jack poured out his heart. He told me how he'd lost everything, how he'd realized what truly mattered in life. I was wrong, Rita, he said, his eyes pleading. So wrong. But I see now that you were the only one who ever truly cared for me. The only one I've ever really loved. Then, to my utter disbelief, Jack got down on one knee, producing a small velvet box. Rita, please. Give me another chance. Marry me again. Together, we can overcome anything. For a moment, I was speechless. Then, I did something that surprised even me. I laughed. It started as a small chuckle and grew into full-blown, tears streaming down my face laughter. Jack's face fell. What's so funny? When I finally caught my breath, I looked him straight in the eye. Oh, Jack. Did you really think it would be that easy? That you could treat me like garbage, throw me away, and then come crawling back when things got tough? His expression darkened. Now listen here, he snarled, jumping to his feet. This is my house too. I have rights. I calmly walked to the drawer where I kept our divorce papers, pulling them out and showing him his own signature. No, Jack, you don't. You signed away any claim to this house. It's mine. Now get out, or I'll call the cops." For a moment, I thought he might try to argue further. But something in my expression must have told him I meant business. Without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I called Tommy and told him everything. My wonderful son was supportive as always. "You did the right thing, Mom," he said. "I'm proud of you." Those words meant more to me than he could ever know. In the weeks that followed, I made some big decisions. The house, with all its memories both good and bad, felt too big for just me. So I sold it, using the money to buy a cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood I'd always loved. At 60, I'm finding that life is just beginning. I've started traveling, seeing all the places Jack always promised we'd visit but never did. I've taken up painting, joined a book club, even tried my hand at salsa dancing. Every now and then, I catch a glimpse of Jack around town. He looks older now, worn down by his mistakes and misfortunes. Life didn't turn out the way I expected. But you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now, for the first time in a long time, I'm truly, completely, happily me.